Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Brian Sullivan from CNBC and Wilbur Ross, former U.S. Secretary of Commerce.
Have a seat here. We're the last ones before the drinks. But you're not going anywhere because Biden just rolled in next door. This is true. President Biden is next door. It's like 600 blocks are closed around us. So we'll get through. We're going to have a great panel, and then the drinks will open up. But you're stuck in the Sheraton for like 3 days. So it's going to be okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks. It's a real honor. Former Secretary of Commerce, king of distressed. For 20 years, Secretary Ross, I think we've been interviewing off and on. It's a real honor.
That's true.
For me.
Thank you.
What you may not realize about Wilbur Ross now with his success is if you look across the river, okay, anybody know where Weehawken, New Jersey is? Okay, you probably just know because you saw Hamilton, because that's where Burr killed him. That's where they had the duel. It's across the river. It's right there. That's where Wilbur Ross grew up, that in North Bergen, New Jersey. When you were growing up, that kid looking across at Manhattan, did you ever imagine where you would end up as one of the kings of Manhattan?
No, I did not.
Yeah. Who would? I mean, where was there a moment when that kid from Weehawken looked across the river at even big buildings and said, I'm going to go there and I'm going to become the business magnate you've become?
Well, it started when I was at Yale. When I got to Yale, my dream was to be a fiction writer. And in second year, they had a course, very tough course called Daily Themes. Every day you had to put in 1,000 words of poetry or fiction. By the end of the second week, I was out of material. So
Pre-chat GPT, right? Write
yeah,
me a haiku.
That's right. There was no AI then. And so I dropped the course, dropped the idea, and then a faculty advisor took me down to Wall Street for a summer job. And that was how it started.
Really?
Yep.
We could have had like John McPhee, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and Wilbur Ross.
Yes.
But you went the hard turn into bankruptcy and distressed investing and everything else. What was that moment? Was there a moment where you knew you liked it and you were gonna make it? It's in the book, Risks and Returns.
Yeah. This is the biggest risk I've taken lately, is writing a book and exposing my inner thoughts
Well, you became
to the
author.
world.
Yes. You did it.
Thank you.
It's not fiction, but hey.
Well, I hope it's not viewed as fiction. It's
No.
meant to be factual.
I'm in the news business. I get it. What was that moment where you said, I'm really good at this?
Well, when I first came to Wall Street after getting out of the military, which followed my training at Harvard Business School, the man, a go-go money manager who had hired me, died the week before I was to join the firm. And on his deathbed, he sold it to one of their major clients. So the firm changed ownership before I even got to my desk. Then, about 2 weeks later, Jack Dorrance, who then was the CEO of Campbell Soup, came in, and so did his pension fund. They had $3 billion with us. And he said to our new owner, tell me, Bob, why do we have so many shares of Lucky Friday Silver Mines in our accounts? Bob was used to being a client, not a professional, so he turned to me, said, Wilbur, do I have Lucky Friday shares as well? Dorrance asked a few more questions, left, and 2 days later pulled the $3 billion because it was clear the new owner had no idea how to be an investment manager. He was used to being a client. So a few days later, he was at a Citibank board meeting. He was on the board of Citibank, and he was grousing to Dick Perkins, whom you probably remember was the CEO. Perkins said, I have a solution for you. Sam Milbank is the main capital partner at a nice old firm called Wood Struthers. Take about $10 million, give it to him for his capital, they'll rename the firm, and nobody will ever again ask you about Lucky Friday Silver Mine. So now I changed jobs for the second time to an employer I'd never even heard of, much less applied to. But at least this time I got a couple of paychecks before the change. They were conservative. They liquidated the venture capital fund we had. And since I was the newest and most expendable person, they made me an officer of the fund and said, if in 2 years you can get us out of this thing with no litigation, no more investment by us, and no bad press, you'll get a big bonus. So now I changed jobs for the third time in no time at all. And I was beginning to think this Wall Street place is a little bit crazy. Nothing stays
It is, though. I mean, it is crazy.
Well, it's gotten crazier.
Yeah.
But that was when I first learned about working companies out and trying to find value, trying to salvage what could be there.
Is there one thing, a lot of people in here are investors, want to be investors, maybe want to be the next Wilbur Ross. And I've had the privilege of interviewing, Warren Buffett and a few others, a very few of you at that level. Is there one thing, when you look at a company, is there one thing, the first thing that your eyeball goes to on the balance sheet or the income statement?
Well,
or is it management?
It's even more fundamental than that. I had a professor at Harvard Business School who taught me a very important lesson. He said, when you're doing due diligence on something, the only stupid question is the one you failed to ask. So being persistent in the questioning, not making any assumptions, not taking anything for granted, to me, that's the key to the whole thing. The other part of it, and that's on the analytical part, the other part in terms of which deals you should even look at, what I always tried to do was to take apparent risk instead of actual risk. You get paid by the market for buying something that they think is very risky. Trick is it really as risky as they think it is, or is the appearance of risk an exaggeration of the actual? That arbitrage, if you get it right, leaves a lot of room to make a lot of money.
That's fascinating. I think about the world of sports like that. They take a chance on a pitcher, maybe everybody thinks is washed up.
Sure.
Right? So the pitcher comes cheap, but then somebody spots something in the pitcher. They realize they're not. So you're able to, those have got to be very rare opportunities though, Wilbur, right? I mean, how do you know that the risk and perceived risk are wrong?
Well, you never absolutely know until after the fact, because there are only two good days in what I was doing: the day you buy something and the day you sell it. In between, it's horrible because you have to take responsibility for it.
Is there anything, I mean, you went into public service, Secretary of Commerce. I've got to imagine as a guy that likes to run your companies kind of lean and mean.
Yes.
DC is probably the opposite of lean and mean. Is that like a fair thing to say? It's not partisan, both sides. I mean, what was the biggest shock when you went into the Department of Commerce at how DC operates versus the private sector?
Well, first of all, the culture is almost the reverse of Wall Street, in that in Wall Street, if you take a big risk and you prevail, you get a pretty good reward, because Wall Street compensation is a very steep pyramid. Public sector, it's a very flat oblong. Nobody really makes any money. So the reward system is titles. And one thing I learned about titles is that their power varies inversely and exponentially with the length of the title. Think about it. President, very short title, very powerful. Third assistant to the fourth deputy to the undersecretary of commerce. Very long title, not much power. But to the holder of that title, that's the lifeblood, because that's what says where he or she gets seated at dinner, or indeed if they even get invited to the dinner. So it's a whole different system of reward. In terms of the risk part, there's always a congressional committee happy to rip you apart over TV. I know that from personal experience. And there's always an inspector general also willing to rip you apart. So it makes the people in government quite averse to change and quite averse to taking risk. It's a bad thing because they're in the middle of the bureaucracies. There are a lot of very talented people, very dedicated people who have trouble getting anything done because of the way the bureaucracy works.
A lot of Secretary General Stoltenberg came backstage when we were back getting ready, and he was amazing. And what a talk, an important talk. And there's just so many people around, and you wonder, you know, the one standing next to the Secretary General is obviously the next most powerful person.
Right.
And then there's a show called The Office, you know, the comedy, and the one guy at one point says, "I'm the assistant manager," and then he says, "No, you're the assistant to the manager," right? Which is kind of, I think, what you're getting at.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to wrap it up. Everybody's like champing it. It's champing at the bit, not chomping, by the way. What's the best deal you've ever made, and what's the worst deal you've ever made?
Okay, well, the best deal was when I bought my business from the Rothschilds. I was a very late bloomer. At 63, I became an entrepreneur.
So there's hope. There's hope. That's great.
There's hope for everybody. And then when I was named Commerce Secretary, I was the oldest person ever given a cabinet post in the whole history of the country. And now, at 86, I've tried writing a book. So I figure by the time I get to be 100, I'll have to find a fourth set of opportunity that's different from the first three.
Well, it's actually, you make a good point, because longevity has changed the way we look at business now.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right? There's people starting second acts at 60, 63 years old,
yeah,
and have a long runway. So what's the worst deal? Was it, don't say Lucky Friday Silver Mine, okay? Whatever happened to Lucky Friday Silver Mines?
I don't have any idea. They
Not so lucky.
They couldn't have gotten too bad because I would have run into them if they had.
Did you just make a deal, you're like, oh, what'd I do?
Yeah. The worst advice I ever got was don't rock the boat. Most boats could use a little bit of rocking, even fairly healthy companies. So the idea, just go along, go with the tide, that's terrible, terrible advice.
But it's safe.
Well, it's safe.
It keeps that title,
Yeah,
Wilbur.
it does. It's safe, but it's dangerous if you have any aspirations to get anywhere. Because my view is the only person who can hold you back is yourself.
I like that. CNBC here, obviously, so you know what's coming. I'm going to, not just about the book, risks and returns. There you go. The Fed, last week, I was shocked. I didn't think they were going to cut rates at all this year. They cut, and they cut by 0.5%. Fancy people say 50 basis points. I called it the bazooka. I found the cut a little odd, given that Powell also made a lot of positive comments.
Right.
You know, I've been doing this 25 years. I've never had a Fed cut 0.5% and then also make positive comments at the same time.
Right.
What did you make of it?
Well, I'm not a Jay Powell fan. I have to admit that.
Okay.
I think he's been out of sync with the curve just about his whole time as Fed chair. When we were in office in late 17, early 2018, President Trump called me one morning about 6:30. There had been something on TV, maybe on CBS, I don't know, about the Fed raising the rates yet again. And in that time, there was no real inflation, low unemployment, but not real inflation. And yet he was raising rates. So Trump asked me to go talk to him, and I called him, and we had a very unsatisfactory conversation. I said, Jay, I don't understand it. Why are you raising rates now? There's not a scintilla of inflation going on. And he said, well, the Fed models say if unemployment is below 4% and not heading up, there will be inflation. I said, well, okay, I'm a little skeptical of models. I've made my living betting against models, so, but leave that aside. Suppose the model is right. You have a meeting every month. Most you'll be is 1 month behind the inflation curve. Why is that such a big deal? And Jay's response was, I have no obligation to justify myself to you. And in fact, I don't have any obligation to talk with you, so I'm ending the conversation. So that was my first experience with him.
Yeah.
But the models were wrong then. Now, a few months later, he did start cutting, but there was never really, in my view, a need to raise them when he did. And then when it came time really to raise them after all the big problems, he was very slow to raise them. Then one is tempted to think that because he was up for renewal as the Federal Reserve chair, and it might have been a little inconvenient for Biden if he had raised rates sooner. I have no proof that that's the case, but the timing is a little clumsy. Now the cut, you could also argue is political, but I don't think it makes that much difference whether it's a quarter or a half, in that if the only thing keeping the economy going is that last 25 basis points, then you don't have much hope for the economy. It's not a big enough thing to matter. So I think one of the mistakes the Fed has made is to talk so much about rates and keep changing their minds. And I think they've made a lot of confusion. Being a little more quiet and just taking action when they need to, I think, is maybe not a bad idea.
Well, we'll end it on that. And if the Fed can do anything about $800 room rates at the Sheraton or auto or home insurance, let us know. But really amazing insight. I wish we had more time, but they really keep it rolling here at Concordia. I kind of like that. Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross, just a great guy, by the way. Thank you for your time and schlepping here, because he had to get out of his car and walk blocks because, ironically, you got blocked, literally blocked by the president.
Yes, that's
Maybe
true.
they knew it was you. Right? Anyway, everybody, give Wilbur Ross, please, a big hand. Thank you. Thank you. All right, that was great.
Thank you, Brian.
No, they knew it was you, and they were like, we're going to block him.